Cassandra Winzar, who's the Chief Economist at CEDA, the Committee for Economic Development of Australia, has been thinking about our skilled immigrants as well. But rather than change how we select them, she wants to focus on how we can improve the outcomes of those we already have.
So the first thing is around English language. So it's really clear from the data that English language skills are one of the most important things for people to have a successful career in Australia, and to have a much smaller gap with the Australian-born population. And this is really important, particularly as we look at the composition of migrants, and we're getting more and more migrants coming from non-English speaking backgrounds. So there's a couple of aspects to the English skills that we could be looking at in order to improve outcomes. One is looking at what the requirements are to come to Australia and to get the visa. But the other thing is also looking at what do we do once people have arrived in Australia. And for some visa types, particularly for family or humanitarian visas, we offer migrants quite a lot of English language training, and that works pretty well. It has good payoffs. But we don't offer much in the way of English training for people coming through on skilled visas. And while they have a generally high level of conversational English, it is quite a big step to go from that to very technical or professional English. And so there's likely to be really high payoffs if government or other organisations were to invest in professional English language training for skilled migrants. We've seen that in some other countries, such as Canada. They've done that, and that's worked really well. So it's around just bridging some of those gaps and making sure you take them from, what's a general conversational level English to a really high level. And if we do that, then we're likely to get a lot more out of these migrants.
Another of your recommendations is rethinking the recognition of qualifications. And in a way, this is almost the opposite problem, because there are many highly skilled professionals who get to Australia and then find that their qualifications don't count, or don't count for as much as they should.
Yeah, and I think I think a lot of us have experienced this. It's pretty common that you get in an Uber and you're having a chat to the driver, and you find out they've actually a pretty highly skilled professional from overseas, whether it's engineering or something like that, but they haven't been able to get that recognition of their qualifications here. And Australia has pretty high barriers to overcome for a lot of occupational licensing and skills recognition, and some of that's for very good reasons, particularly around safety, risk and quality, but some of it is really just putting barriers in place that don't necessarily need to be there.
Closed shops, one might think.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a lot that we could do here to look at how we're recognising overseas qualifications, make that a simpler process. It's a very opaque and difficult process for a lot of professions. Looking at how we can assess competency rather than qualifications, so not just having the piece of paper, but actually, are there ways that we can show that people have those skills? And particularly looking at some short bridging courses in a lot of professions. The UK's had a lot of success with putting in some short bridging courses for overseas nurses. So instead of having to go back and essentially do the whole qualification again, which is not a productive use of a migrant's time and often too costly or too complicated to them to go through, looking at some shorter bridging courses during that time which they assess competency and make sure they are meeting those requirements.
You also want to change how secondary applicants are considered.
Yeah, so when we're looking at skilled migration, permanent stream and the points test, you have a primary applicant, but you also often have a secondary applicant. So that's usually a spouse or a partner of the primary applicant. And the visa application is primarily assessed on the basis of the primary applicant, and they do get a little bit of a boost if they have a particularly skilled partner, but it's less than 10% of the overall points test. And what we found is, while the primary applicants often do quite well, some of the secondary applicants are not having as good labour market outcomes when they get into Australia. So they're having bigger wage gaps, and it's taking longer to find appropriate jobs. What we're suggesting is a little bit of a rethink of that, and looking at the couple more as a couple rather than just the primary applicant, and giving more of a boost to the overall points on the secondary applicant. So if you've got a secondary applicant that has really high skills, has really good English language ability, that can give a bit more of a boost to the primary applicant as well. And that overall, the impact of having two people coming here who are highly skilled, who've got good English, is likely to mean that they're both going to have better outcomes for the whole economy.
The fourth of your key recommendations seems to me in many ways the hardest one, because it's not a policy change. You want to reduce discrimination, but how do we do that?
Yeah, look, this is absolutely the most challenging, and it's also the most challenging to work out to what degree this is impacting as well, because it's hard to really collect data on discrimination and what exactly that means. But it is pretty clear that there is an element of discrimination in the Australian labour market. A lot of that is probably unconscious, and we do often see it kind of couched in a real value for local experience. So you might have someone who's very highly skilled and does have good English skills as well, with good experience overseas, but really struggling with that lack of local experience here. So there's a few things that we could do. There are certainly some pilot projects around about trying to reduce prejudice in hiring processes, and some things we could be looking at there. But the other thing is to look at how do we help people build those local networks and get some of those skills and understanding and be more involved in the community, which can help to better labour market outcomes as well. So looking at programs to build networks within industries. And there's also been some good success with local mentors as well. So matching up migrants with a local mentor in their industry that helps them understand the industry better, but also helps them in building those connections and having someone who knows them and being able to advocate for them and help them in the workforce.
Cassandra Winzar, Chief Economist at CEDA.